There are moments in our lives when we suddenly notice that certain people are fading away from us, and no matter how hard we pray, things never return to what they once were. We replay conversations in our minds, wondering if we failed, if we said the wrong thing, or if God is disappointed in us. But what if the separation was never meant to destroy us? What if God was quietly protecting our future while we were grieving the loss of familiar people? Sometimes we cannot step into a new season while holding on to relationships connected to an old one. In this video, we are going to discover why God removes certain people before a breakthrough arrives. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment, "Lord, I trust your plan," so God may strengthen your spirit and bless everyone who stays until the end. Number 1, loss of peace. Have you ever noticed how some people can walk into your life and slowly steal the peace God was trying to build inside you? At first, you ignore it because nothing feels obviously wrong. The conversations still happen, the friendship still exists, the relationship still looks normal from the outside. But deep inside, something changes. Every interaction leaves you emotionally exhausted instead of spiritually strengthened. Every conversation creates confusion instead of clarity, and without realizing it, you begin losing the calmness you once had in God's presence. This is one of the strongest signs God may be removing someone from your life before your breakthrough arrives, because God's direction is always connected to His peace. Colossians 3:15 says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." That word "rule" means to act like an umpire. Peace becomes the signal that tells us what belongs in our lives and what does not. So when a relationship constantly fills your spirit with anxiety, heaviness, fear, or emotional instability, heaven may be warning you that something is out of alignment. Many of us stay too long because we are attached to history. We remember who they used to be. We remember the laughter, the memories, the years we spent together. But God sees what we cannot see. He sees how certain voices slowly weaken our discernment. He sees how certain people pull us away from prayer, purpose, and spiritual focus little by little. That is why sometimes God will allow discomfort to grow inside a relationship before He allows separation to happen outside of it. And the painful truth is this: some people cannot remain connected to the version of you that God is raising up. Their presence may comfort your flesh while quietly suffocating your spirit. So if your peace has been disappearing every time someone enters the room, do not ignore it. God may already be preparing your heart to let go of what can no longer go where He is taking you. Number 2, sudden separation. One of the most confusing things God will ever allow in our lives is a separation we never saw coming. Someone who once called us every day suddenly becomes distant. A relationship that felt stable begins falling apart without warning. The connection weakens, the conversations dry up, and no matter how hard we try to hold everything together, it keeps slipping through our hands. In moments like these, many of us immediately blame ourselves. We wonder what we did wrong. We replay old conversations, searching for answers that never come. But sometimes the silence itself is the answer. There are seasons when God removes people quickly because delay would only deepen the damage. What feels sudden to us is often something heaven has been addressing for a long time behind the scenes. God sees motives we cannot see. He hears conversations we were never meant to hear. He knows how certain relationships would affect our future if they remained in our lives, and in His mercy, He begins separating us before the real destruction arrives. This is why some endings happen without closure, because closure is not always necessary for obedience. We often believe every relationship deserves one final explanation, one last conversation, one more chance to fix things. But when God decides a season has ended, He may allow the door to close in silence so we stop trying to reopen what He already removed. Ecclesiastes says that there is a season for every purpose under heaven. That includes relationships. Not every person sent into our lives was sent to stay forever. Some people were only part of a temporary chapter meant to teach us, shape us, or reveal something inside us. And when their assignment is complete, God allows separation to happen. So if someone suddenly disappeared from your life and your spirit keeps telling you to let go, stop chasing what God is trying to remove. Your breakthrough may begin the moment your hands finally release what heaven already decided could not remain. Number 3, spiritual exhaustion. There are people who leave us physically, and then there are people who drain us spiritually while still standing right beside us. This kind of relationship is dangerous because from the outside, everything appears normal. You still talk to them. You still spend time together. You still try to convince yourself that nothing has changed, but your spirit knows the truth long before your mind accepts it. After every interaction, you feel tired instead of uplifted. Your motivation weakens. Your prayer life becomes inconsistent. The excitement you once had about your calling slowly fades into confusion and heaviness. You begin questioning things God already confirmed in your heart. What once strengthened your faith now leaves you emotionally burdened. And the frightening part is that it usually happens little by little. The enemy rarely destroys people through obvious attacks. Sometimes he works through constant spiritual exhaustion, through relationships that slowly pull your focus away from God without you noticing it at first. This is why discernment matters so deeply in the life of every believer. Not everyone around you is assigned to your future. Some people are attached to a version of you that God is trying to leave behind. Think about Samson. Delilah did not destroy his strength in one moment. The danger grew through repeated closeness, repeated conversations, repeated compromise. And many believers are doing the same thing emotionally. They stay connected to people who constantly weaken their spiritual sensitivity because they are afraid of loneliness or guilt. But God never removes people to make your life empty. He removes them to make room for spiritual clarity. Sometimes exhaustion is heaven's warning sign that your soul is carrying connections it was never meant to sustain forever. Pay attention to what happens to your spirit after certain conversations. Pay attention to who makes you feel closer to God and who leaves you feeling distant from Him. Because one of the clearest signs God is preparing you for breakthrough is when He begins exposing the relationships that quietly drain the strength He was trying to build within you. Number 4, outgrowing the relationship. One of the strangest seasons in life is when we begin changing spiritually, but the people around us remain attached to the old version of us. At first, we barely notice it. We are simply praying more, thinking differently, becoming more careful about what we allow into our hearts. But over time, the relationship starts feeling harder to carry. The connection that once felt natural now feels forced, not because hatred entered the relationship, but because growth did. This is one of the clearest signs God may be removing someone from your life before your breakthrough. Because elevation changes compatibility. The higher God calls you, the harder it becomes to stay connected to people who are committed to staying spiritually stagnant. And many believers struggle with this because they confuse familiarity with assignment. Just because someone has been with us for years does not mean they are meant to walk into the next season with us. History alone is not proof of destiny. Sometimes we keep relationships alive out of guilt, loyalty, or fear of hurting someone, even while our spirit quietly recognizes that the connection no longer carries life. You may notice that your goals no longer align. Your hunger for God makes them uncomfortable. Your desire for peace clashes with their constant negativity. The conversations that once inspired you now revolve around gossip, fear, drama, or worldly distractions. And every time God begins stretching you toward something greater, they subtly pull you backward toward who you used to be. This is exactly why God told Abraham to leave his homeland. Breakthrough often requires separation from environments and people tied to old identity. You cannot fully become who God created you to be while remaining emotionally chained to who you used to be. And here's the painful truth many people avoid. Some relationships only survive when you stay small. The moment you grow spiritually, pursue holiness, or walk boldly in your calling, tension begins to rise, not because you became prideful, but because your growth exposes what others refuse to confront within themselves. So if certain relationships feel increasingly difficult as your walk with God deepens, do not panic. Sometimes that discomfort is not the sign of failure. It is the evidence that God is preparing you for a level where everyone cannot follow. Number 5, constant doubt. One of the most dangerous people in our lives is not always the one who openly attacks us. Sometimes it is the person who quietly fills our mind with doubt every time God is trying to grow our faith. They may sound caring. They may even seem supportive at times. But whenever we begin moving closer to our calling, their words slowly plant fear, hesitation, and confusion inside us. Have you noticed how certain people always make you question what God already confirmed in prayer? The moment you talk about your vision, they respond with negativity. The moment you begin healing, they remind you of your past. The moment you start trusting God for something greater, they focus only on the risks, the failures, and the reasons it may never happen. Over time, their voice becomes louder than your discernment. This is exactly how spiritual distraction works. The enemy does not always tempt believers with obvious sin. Sometimes he sends discouragement through familiar voices. That is why Eve fell in the garden after listening to the wrong voice question what God had already spoken. Did God really say? Those 4 words introduced doubt into a place where trust once existed, and many of us are still surrounded by relationships that constantly weaken our confidence in God's direction. Every conversation leaves us second-guessing ourselves. We feel mentally exhausted trying to explain our faith, our growth, or the changes God is making inside us. Instead of feeling sharpened, we feel spiritually unstable. God will often remove those voices before breakthrough because doubt and destiny cannot grow together forever. Eventually, one will overpower the other. This is why some relationships become uncomfortable the closer we get to our next season. God begins exposing the voices that no longer agree with where He is leading us. Pay attention to the people who repeatedly make you feel smaller, fearful, or uncertain after God has already given you peace. Not every voice deserves access to your spirit. Sometimes, breakthrough begins when God silences the very people who kept speaking against the future He was trying to build within you. Number 6, closed doors. Sometimes the clearest sign God is removing someone from our lives is that every attempt to keep the relationship alive suddenly stops working. We try to reconnect, but the conversations feel forced. We try to repair things, but more distance keeps appearing. We pray for restoration, yet every door we try to reopen somehow closes again. And deep inside, we feel frustrated because we cannot understand why God is not allowing things to return to the way they used to be. What many believers fail to realize is that God often speaks through closed doors. Not every blocked relationship is an attack from the enemy. Sometimes it is protection from God Himself. We assume that if we care enough, pray enough, or fight hard enough, we can force certain people to remain in our lives forever. But when heaven decides a season is over, human effort cannot reverse what God has already shut down. Think about Jonah. Every time he tried to run from God's direction, obstacles appeared, storms rose, paths closed, circumstances turned against him until he finally surrendered. In the same way, God will sometimes frustrate unhealthy attachments because He sees where they will lead if they continue. What feels like resistance may actually be divine mercy preventing future heartbreak or spiritual destruction. This becomes especially painful when we idolize the relationship more than God's will. We keep asking God to bless something He is trying to remove. We keep begging for access to doors heaven already locked. And the harder we fight to keep those connections alive, the more exhausted we become emotionally and spiritually. But there comes a moment when mature faith stops forcing what God is not sustaining. We begin to recognize that if peace, trust, and alignment constantly disappear every time we try rebuilding the connection, maybe God is saying no for a reason. Not every closed door means failure. Some doors close because breakthrough is waiting somewhere else. And many times, God removes certain people by making it impossible for the relationship to continue the way it once did. Because He knows that what is ahead of us is too important to stay connected to what keeps pulling us backward. Number 7, emotional heaviness. Not every toxic relationship begins with betrayal. Sometimes it begins with a weight we cannot explain. We enter certain conversations feeling normal, but we leave feeling emotionally burdened. Our mind becomes restless. Our heart feels heavy. Even after the interaction ends, something inside us remains unsettled, and the longer we ignore it, the heavier that feeling becomes. Many believers dismiss this because they are waiting for obvious signs. They assume God only removes people after major conflict, dramatic betrayal, or visible sin. But often the first warning is spiritual heaviness, a constant pressure in your soul that appears whenever certain people gain access to your emotions, your thoughts, or your private struggles. This is important because our spirit recognizes danger before our emotions are willing to accept it. We may love someone deeply, while our discernment quietly tells us their presence is no longer healthy for our future. That inner heaviness is not always anxiety. Sometimes it is conviction. Sometimes it is God alerting us that the relationship has become spiritually unhealthy, even if it still appears emotionally familiar. King Saul is a powerful example of this. David honored him, served him, and remained loyal for years. But eventually, Saul's jealousy and spiritual instability created an atmosphere that became dangerous for David's destiny. Imagine if David had ignored those warning signs simply because of emotional attachment. His calling would have remained trapped in an environment poisoned by fear, insecurity, and resentment. And many people today are doing exactly that. They remain emotionally tied to relationships that constantly darken their spirit because they fear loneliness more than spiritual damage. They stay connected to people who drain their emotional strength while convincing themselves it is simply part of loyalty. But God never intended relationships to become chains around our spirit. Healthy connections bring life, wisdom, peace, and spiritual encouragement. They do not constantly leave us emotionally suffocated. So if someone's presence repeatedly fills your heart with heaviness instead of peace, pay attention. God may be exposing a relationship that no longer aligns with the future He is preparing for you. Sometimes breakthrough begins when we stop ignoring the burden our spirit has been trying to warn us about all along. What we have seen today is that when God removes certain people from our lives, it is not always rejection, punishment, or loss. Many times, it is divine protection preparing us for a breakthrough we cannot yet see. The pain of separation may feel heavy now, but God is clearing away what no longer belongs in the season He is leading us into. And if this message touched your heart, the next video on your screen will help you understand why so many people have been quietly struggling with emptiness, confusion, and the feeling that life has lost its meaning lately. Even while smiling on the outside, that message goes even deeper into the spiritual battle happening within the soul. If this video encouraged you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay strong in faith, keep trusting God's timing, and may His peace guide your heart until we meet again in the next video.